Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Liz Pimper, and I'll be your moderator for today's WJE webinar, Building Enclosure Commissioning, Improving Performance and Managing Risk. During the next hour, WJE's Fiona Aldous and Elizabeth Cassin will discuss the building enclosure commissioning process and related benefits, tasks included in the process, including critical items that should be considered during those tasks, responsibilities of project team members, key BECx documents, and the presenter's recommendations for how to successfully implement the BECx process based upon their collective experiences. Both Fiona and Elizabeth have experience in the forensic investigation and repair of building enclosures and are experts in commissioning. And now I will turn it over to Elizabeth to get us started. Elizabeth?
Thanks, Liz, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining Fiona and me today as we talk about how building enclosure commissioning can help to improve the performance of your building enclosure and how to help manage the risks associated with building enclosure failures. These learning objectives are what we hope you'll come away with an hour from now. And rather than us just telling you what you can find through an internet search, we're going to try to tell you how to make the process more successful based upon our collective experiences with commissioning high-performance buildings. Here's an outline of where we plan to take you today. First, a basic background on building enclosure performance and failures, setting the stage for the purpose and benefits of building enclosure commissioning. We'll give you a quick overview of some of the standards and guides that you should be familiar with, and then we'll go through a few of the key steps in the process, and finally we'll discuss the practical side of the process and how to make it successful on your next project. And we'll leave time at the end to answer any questions that you might have. So starting really basic with what the building enclosure is, what it needs to do, and how it can fail. The role of the building enclosure is to provide protection from exterior forces and provide interior comfort for building occupants. That sounds pretty simple, but there's a lot of things to consider when designing, installing, or commissioning a building enclosure. Most of them are listed in the table shown. I'm not going to read all of these. They're all important, but note that the couple that go wrong most often are the control of heat, air, and moisture flow, which leads to issues with durability of materials. Typical enclosure systems include roofing, opaque walls, fenestration, below-grade walls, and slab on ground. Materials and assemblies that are part of these systems can get pretty complex, and where they come together, what we call the integration details, these are the things that oftentimes go wrong with how they control heat, air, and moisture flow. To get these integration details right requires technical knowledge of performance, which is a key trait for any building enclosure commissioning provider, as Fiona will discuss a little later. So when enclosures don't properly control heat, air, and moisture movement, these are the kinds of things that can happen. We can have bulk water leakage, as you see there in the top left photo. We can have visible condensation, like you see in that top middle photo. We can have condensation within assemblies, leading to wood rot and corrosion of metal. We can have improper control of air and vapor movement, which results in mold, like on the underside of this roof deck in that bottom right photo, happening in a cold climate, or on the inside of these exterior walls in a hot climate, like you see in the bottom left photo. And one of the things that you don't see, so I don't have a photo of, or that you can't see, so I don't have a photo of it, but it happens frequently due to enclosures that leak air, is the inability to control your HVAC system and adequately condition a space. This is essentially throwing money down the drain on electric or gas bills, and it's obviously not good for the environment. So these are the types of things we're being called to investigate all the time, and it's why we're being called more and more frequently for building enclosure commissioning to try to prevent these problems before they occur, since it's so much more costly to correct a problem once it's built. And that's because the problems are usually not at the surface. So why are building enclosures failing so frequently? The building enclosures are more sensitive to failures now with the use of less permeable or less vapor permeable materials. We used to use craft paper and plywood, and now we're using plastic and OSB. So we have less drying across the wall system. We're using more and more insulation also, which results in less energy transfer across the wall, which results in less drying. We're building things more airtight with air barriers now, which results in less airflow across building enclosures and less drying. Less drying means more moisture, which leads to durability problems. We also have less moisture storage with the use of more uninsulated metal stud walls, which don't hold any water compared if you were to compare that to wood studs with bad insulation. So with this type of wall, deficiencies in the air barrier are going to show up pretty immediately. And we all like things that look interesting. Like one of my favorite buildings, the dancing building in Prague. So we're designing complex enclosures. It's much harder to get these tricky interface details right. And finally, building enclosures account for a significant portion of the energy consumed in buildings. And this costs money and, like I said, isn't environmentally friendly, especially for leaky enclosures, or as you can see in this photo, enclosures with significant thermal bridging. So rightfully, owners are demanding more out of their buildings, and energy codes are getting more stringent with requirements for air tightness and the amount of insulation required so that energy is conserved. So we have less storage and less drying, we have more challenging buildings, and we are expecting more out of building enclosure performance. How do we get that right? This is where building enclosure commissioning comes in. And I'll turn it over to Fiona for this section.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And so, yeah, building enclosure commissioning. We're going to chat briefly about the purpose, the benefits, and exactly what is entailed with the commissioning process. The way we see it is there are three primary goals to building enclosure commissioning, and the core goal being meeting the owner's expectations, because after all, it is all about how the owners use their buildings and ensuring that they have full potential to use it and the building enclosures perform properly. If we don't have an adequately performing building enclosure, we're potentially not going to have the same abilities to be able to use the interior and have it function properly as well as safely and consistently. We also aim to reduce risk. That just goes hand in hand. So if you have a less tolerance for risk overall, we believe that there may be more increased need for commissioning. We also like to document the enclosure, and that means that after you've actually gone through the whole construction process, we want to make sure that you as the owner of the building have the ability to understand exactly what was constructed and how exactly to maintain it. Because we all understand, as Elizabeth indicated, that our buildings are complicated and there's many, many ways in which building enclosures can fail. So the building enclosure commissioning process is a quality-oriented process. I think we define that through a number of tasks that are performed in order to achieve basically back to goal number one, which is achieving the owner's expectations. During the design phase and the construction phase, there's a number of different and various tasks that are performed by the commissioning providers, in fact, the whole team, to actually make sure that the commissioning process is a success. During the design, what we wish to do is to improve the quality of the performance, and that's conveyed through the contract documents, the design intent of the architects. And then as we move into the construction phase, what we'd like to do is to enhance the delivery, document the installations, and then test to verify the performance of the actual enclosure. And then wrapping it up is to actually train the staff. So going through this in a little more detail here. The pre-design phase is really where we have the most opportunity for the owners to sit down and have a good start to the project. And these slides may kind of imply that we get you in a small room that's dimly lit and just one window, and put a packet of donuts in front of you and make you all try and figure out exactly what you expect out of your building. Well, that's perhaps only just a little bit true. Sometimes we bring bagels in lieu of donuts. But the idea is that we need to establish what the owner's project requirements are. It is the OPR, that's generically what we call it. And this is a document that lists what the expectations are of all of the stakeholders, and we're able to use that as a benchmark as we move through the design and through the construction phases to end up at the end of the project understanding, did we meet the expectations, or if we didn't, exactly how we deviated from them along the way. The OPR is a living document, so we do have that opportunity to make changes and adapt to design or construction as it may occur, costs, such like that. The commissioning provider also has the opportunity to help with establishing exactly what the scope is and what the commissioning plan needs to be in order to address that scope. And then moving on into the design process, this is where we have the most opportunity for success, in my opinion. This is where the designer is going to document the systems, the details, and the performance expectations of the building enclosure. This is where the commissioning provider has the opportunity to review the documents and provide constructive criticism as well as recommendations for improvements and back-check those that are to ensure that they are included in the documents. We look to review the documents based upon the OPR. So that's, again, coming back to how important the OPR document is. And then at the conclusion of the design phase, what we like to do is put together a project-specific building enclosure commissioning spec that identifies the tests and roles and responsibility of all of the players on the team. And then moving into construction, this is really where our most benefit can be from the technical side, giving our experience being on the job site. And this is where we can have success or from where failure can stem. So it's important to get reviews of the submittals. We can attend meetings, do our site visits, and getting up close and personal, not just doing a generic site walked, but as you can see through the images, it's a close-up inspection. It's looking at the gaskets on the skylight. It's getting in there and testing and observing the tests and identifying if there are problems. How do we begin to rectify those problems? And making sure that we're doing the appropriate testing for the systems that we're looking to verify. We hold meetings throughout the construction phase to ensure that those issues are all addressed in a timely manner and they're not just forgotten about until the end of the project. And then we wrap up the construction phase into the occupancy and transition into ensuring that the owner understands what the building enclosure is comprised of. We provide a maintenance manual to ensure they're able to continue to maintain the building and train their staff. We do that through hands-on. We do the training, taking the owner's staff through the building, teaching how to do roof inspections, identifying critical details and things to maintain. And then prior to the expiration of the warranty, their typical one-year warranty, we do a review of the building enclosure to ensure that it's meeting the ongoing expectations of the facility. This is an opportunity where we can do, perhaps just inspections of roofing systems, but maybe an opportunity also to do infrared or such like that if there are possibly concerns about how the building is performing. So there are some standards and guidelines which allow us to implement this process. Basically, there are 4 documents published currently. The original document was the National Institute of Building Sciences Guidelines 3, published in 2006 and then republished in 2012. From that point, 3 other standards have evolved, a couple of which are ASTM, One provides you a standard practice for the building enclosure commissioning, and the other provides you a guide to implementing the standard practice. And then complementary or following on from that, there is the ISO 21105 performance of buildings, which provides a little bit of a different approach. It provides a little bit of flexibility in the approach to commissioning, whereby owners partake in a survey to evaluate their risk, and then based upon the level of risk, they can determine what level of commissioning they do, which is essentially intensity of the various tasks that we just talked about. It also allows different systems to be commissioned versus the entire building enclosure. Similarly, the ASTM does offer 2 levels of commissioning, a fundamental and an enhanced. Which brings us to LEED, because the ASTM fundamental and enhanced are different than how LEED outlines commissioning fundamental and enhanced. LEED identifies fundamental commissioning as a prerequisite, and there are 3 tasks to be performed for the building enclosure. That includes OPR, the basis of design review, and one project design review. The other option for LEED, if you're wishing to continue to pursue additional points, is the enhanced option. Essentially, this is more of a paper exercise. A lot of the tasks that we just talked about with respect to site work are not included as a requirement. The only requirements are basically review of submittals and some systems, manuals, and an ongoing commissioning plan. So now Elizabeth will identify some of the real nuggets of value of building enclosure commissioning.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. So Fiona talked about all of the tasks associated with the process. Here, I'm going to discuss in a little more detail some of the key tasks. Note that all the tasks are important, but these are the ones that we think provide the most value for the process. So as Fiona noted, the OPR is a key part of the building enclosure commissioning process. It's a document that's developed by the owner, sometimes with help from the building enclosure commissioning provider, and it details the performance expectations for the building, such as those listed here. Those performance expectations are dependent on the type or use of the facility, on the level of risk that the owner wants to take on, or service life expectations for the building. Most of the OPRs are unique to each facility, but for some institutional clients, there may be a document already developed, like GSA's P100 shown here for one example. If it has to be developed, oftentimes there's a workshop with all the stakeholders and the building enclosure commissioning provider to identify the desired performance requirements, as Fiona showed in those nice photos with the donuts. The OPR document is the basis for all design and construction decisions moving forward. So it needs to be clear and it needs to be complete. And if something does not meet the OPR down the road during design or during construction, then that thing that doesn't meet the OPR needs to change, or the OPR needs to change. It's a living document that's updated throughout the project as decisions are made. One of the biggest influencers on a successful enclosure and a key part of the process is the design review. So this is where the building enclosure commissioning provider performs a technical review and redlines the drawings and specifications. This is where the commissioning provider makes sure that the design meets the OPR, and they may make recommendations to improve building enclosure performance. He or she will point out issues, and a good provider will explain why they are issues, and in some instances make recommendations or show ways it could be done better with sketches. The intent is to catch problems before it gets built, so building enclosure commissioning provider needs to be able to anticipate issues early in the process. One of the biggest things that you're looking for in the design review is continuity of control layers, or the air barrier and insulation layers. And you're doing that by looking at enlarged details. So doing this successfully takes a lot of patience. It takes attention to detail. It takes an understanding of how systems go together and how they best interface and how they can fail. It also takes an ability to think three-dimensionally because of so many complexities that the 2D drawings can't capture. And this is one example of a detail that is notorious for issues during the wintertime in colder climates. It's a curtain wall parapet. So we have thermal bridging of intermittent vertical curtain wall mullions that extend from exterior to interior. We have thermal shorting, as shown in that orange line there, making the parapet cold. And if interior air can get into that parapet, we can get condensation in the wintertime, which freezes and then runs down your curtain wall in the winter or on a warmer day and looks like a water leak. Other things to think about, we might have differential movement between the roof and the wall if the curtain wall anchor is a wind load anchor. So you have to detail the roofing membrane and the vapor barrier to accommodate that differential movement. You have to think about compatibility of roofing membrane with the curtain wall sealants if the roofing membrane is being glazed into the curtain wall. You have to think about sequencing of construction with several trades coming together here, like the glazer, the roofer, the fire-stopping installer, the insulator, and the framer. So we help to identify how that's actually going to go together. The design review takes a lot of collaboration and communication by the building enclosure commissioning provider with the design architect and the owner. Need to be able to adequately describe issues and recommendations, and then to verify that comments get addressed in a way that adequately addresses the requirements of the OPR. The provider may also look at various models that simulate performance, like in this case, looking at this large slab extension and exterior structure to see if its interior surface temperatures are predicted to be above interior dew point conditions. Submittals, in particular shop drawings, are a critical transition from design to construction, where we start to understand how the design is going to become a reality. So this step is really important also. It's where the rubber meets the road and the actual materials and the actual interfaces are depicted. So even more attention to detail and even more of a technical focus by the building enclosure commissioning provider is required. So for example, here, we're looking at a roofing shop drawing on the left and a curtain wall shop drawing on the right. And here we're looking at coordination among the trades. So, for example, how the roofing interfaces with the top horizontal of the curtain wall and how the vapor barrier membrane that's on top of the concrete deck, how it's interfacing with the backside of the curtain wall as the roofing shop drawings it's trying to show with that, you can slightly see it, that light blue line there. And if you look at the curtain wall shop drawing on the right side, you have the curtain wall anchor there. So how are you actually going to interface those when the roofing shop drawing isn't understanding quite all of the details? So you have to compare these two and know how they're going to get built. Again, comments are added right onto the shop drawings, making note of where things don't meet the OPR or the drawings or specifications, and then sometimes making recommendations for improvement in performance or constructability. It's important to note that the building enclosure commissioning provider does not approve or reject anything. They only offer comments to the architect and owner for their consideration. Also, this process should really help the contractor with their own QC and to help reduce the amount of issues that develop during construction. Another very important piece of the building enclosure commissioning process is the pre-construction performance mock-up, where a representative sample of the enclosure is built either in a laboratory or on site. And then the construction is reviewed and the performance is verified through testing. Testing protocol can vary depending on the project, but usually as a bare minimum, it usually includes air and water leakage testing of the mock-up sample. Mock-ups are such valuable learning tools. They help to verify constructability and performance before full implementation, which would then be more difficult and perhaps pretty costly to change something. The trades are going to be on the project and the ones building it and learning how the systems go together. So it gives them the chance to check their QC processes and train their installers. It's a means to establish the quality expectations for the remainder of the project. Not a project has gone by where we haven't learned something really important with respect to performance or constructability of enclosure systems. So that brings us into construction. Hopefully, if we do a good job with the design review and mock-ups and submittals, construction observation is pretty straightforward. But you can't foresee everything during the design phase, certainly. So a building enclosure commissioning provider can help to resolve unanticipated issues and coordinate interfaces, coordinate installation and interfaces between trades. And they're also reviewing the quality of installation and compliance of the installation with the contract documents. And that's in coordination with the contractor who has their own QC processes in place. Usually visits are performed during first installation of systems and details, during testing, and then routinely throughout the duration of construction. It's critical to see control layers go in, particularly the roofing, the air barrier, and fenestration systems. And it's important to identify and resolve items before they get covered up. So however the issues are communicated, it should be timely and expectations should be clear. We like to walk the site with representatives of the contractor, the architect, and the owner to point out and discuss these things as we see them so that there are no surprises and so that we can work together for resolutions. We also end the visit with a meeting or have a regularly scheduled meeting to discuss the action item log that tracks issues and resolutions. And as shown in the left two images, we provide detailed site visit reports with photos, sketches, or images from the drawings that explain the issue. They explain why it's an issue, and they help to resolve the issue. It goes beyond just pointing out that there is an issue. We're helping to resolve it. A good building enclosure commissioning provider has a strong attention to detail. They aren't afraid to get their hands dirty and get up close to look at the littlest things that can have big implications for failure. A good commissioning provider also collaborates and communicates well with the trades and the project team. The contractor and architect obviously bring a lot of value, and if everyone works together, better solutions can happen. The process does not abdicate the contractor of their normal QA/QC processes, but helps to support it. Field testing is another big part of building enclosure commissioning, but only a part of it. Simply performing a whole building air tightness test at the end of the project is not considered commissioning. Typically, standard test methods through ASTM and AMA are used to verify things like air tightness, water penetration resistance, adhesion, and the like you're seeing here in these photos. The Chinese menu of tests are included in ASTM E2813, and it can be really overwhelming if you don't understand the test method and what it's intended to tell you and how it should be performed. So a competent building enclosure commissioning provider understands these test methods and how to use them. Certain tests may not be appropriate depending on what you're trying to verify or to learn. Testing can be performed by the building enclosure commissioning provider or by an independent testing agency contracted by the provider or by the contractor. Fiona will talk about this a little bit more, but we usually like to see it under the contractor because there's a lot of coordination that has to be done under their control, like access to the test area, performing out-of-sequence work to get certain areas ready for testing, moving materials being stored near test areas, rescheduling tests due to failures or because of the weather isn't good, and so forth. Plus, this way the contractor usually has a greater sense of engagement and responsibility for the testing. Testing is going to be performed at mock-ups, at initial installation, and then at various intervals throughout construction to verify a representative sampling of the installation meets the specified performance requirements. That quantity that is tested, be it 5% of an installation or 100% of an installation, really depends, again, on the building type, the level of risk that is acceptable, and the cost and ease in testing. For example, it's more practical to test 100% of a roofing system since it's totally accessible without a lift or a swing stage, and it makes sense since it's fully exposed to rain and snow, and it's vulnerable to issues. Last but not least, the development of the maintenance manual is another key task in the process. This is a document that identifies manufacturers and materials, including photos, as you see here, who installed it, what the warranty is, and then most importantly, it identifies any maintenance requirements to make sure that the building continues to perform as intended. With that, I'll turn it over to Fiona.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So what we're doing to talk about here in ensuing is really some lessons learned that we've experienced through our 10 plus 15 or so years of implementing commissioning, and prior to that, investigations, consulting, and such like that with Christiani. But I think the very first thing we can understand here is that the commissioning process, even though there's a number of all kind of standard tasks, if you will, is that it needs to be adaptable to your specific project. Every building is unique, okay? We may be building a very generic structure, but if it's done in one environment versus another, a different climate zone than another, we're going to have different mechanisms of potential failure. And so the building enclosure needs to be responsive to those types of risks. So the process in itself needs to be adaptable. The commissioning is sometimes also dependent upon the owner's actual tolerance for risks. If you have a very low tolerance for risks, such as a hospital or archive facility, natatorium, or such like that, where your building enclosure really is protecting some very valuable either occupants or materials or such like that, then again, you have a low tolerance for risk. So perhaps you need to enhance or do more of the types of commissioning tasks that we talked about earlier that to actually reduce the concern of risk of failure. The design itself is also going to drive the level of commissioning. You may have a simple box type of structure whereby you are repeatedly implementing the same design or the same details. May be able to do that with some level of consistency, but you may also have a not so adequate installer. So the building itself, the construction process, the design all needs to somewhat be a function or somewhat influence the level of commissioning. If we have a simple box building versus obviously a Frank Gehry type of building, again, we want to potentially be doing a little more commissioning on the building that's not so typical. Other things that we're finding that influence the level of commissioning that you're going to implement on a building is the project delivery method. And we talk about that in just a couple of minutes here. But and then the approach to the development of the design. We're changing a lot in the way that we implement our projects. So the design assist and the integrated project delivery are becoming more and more common in our practice. So design build is one approach that tends to require we adapt the commissioning process. Although we understand that the commissioning team needs to report directly to the owner, they do need to perhaps change in their contractual relationships. They're not necessarily going to exist, or a contractor is not going to exist at the time that the architect is doing the initial documents. So potentially there's the opportunity to engage the commissioning team early, establish what the OPR is all about, get some kind of a design fee and then a construction phase budget fee from the commissioning provider, with the opportunity for them to continue on through all phases. And then design assist. Many facades are going design assist with the advent of specialty contractors in these areas. It's important to get the commissioning provider on early to help establish the OPR that can be provided and shared with the architect, and then also helps to have the commissioning team on track, and the specialty contractor also understands exactly what the owner's goals are. There's going to be greater integration of technical reviews with the specialty delegated design contractor, and so timing, which is the reason we're getting the delegated design assist concept going earlier, it's really critical that occurs, and the timing of those reviews becomes more upfront and greater impact. There was a question that we saw posted here about commissioning costs. Generally, the scale of the project and the documentation that we've gathered to date is that commissioning is going to be approximately 3 to 4% of the design fee and less than 1%, and we often actually far less than 1% of the total construction cost. But the best value really is in the design review, the ability to get things correct on the construction documents prior to going out to bid or prior to securing a further contractor. This is the biggest opportunity and the best value where an owner can spend their dollars. The procurement of a building enclosure commissioning provider, basically there's two levels or two approaches by which you can retain this independence here. Is that the commissioning provider is looking to be engaged directly through the owner by that having a direct contract, or they could be engaged by the MEP provider, again, a direct path into the owner. We also recommend that the providers are obtained through an RFQ process versus just an RFP. I mean, do you really want your commissioning provider to be just chosen based upon cost? So there's ways in which you can structure RFQs to get information about some costs, but also to identify some of these more intangible types of qualities that you may be looking for in your provider. Similarly, procuring testing is also a question that we get asked frequently, and Elizabeth mentioned this. There's a couple of approaches. You can perform the testing through the general contractor, engage the testing agent through the building enclosure commissioning provider. Retesting, it should be established right up front about what the repercussions are of retesting in the event that there is a failure, what type of additional testing and such may need to be done. And then the commissioning provider is going to be helpful in interpreting exactly the nature of the failure and the risk that an owner may be associated with accepting that failure. Are they looking to just do a multitude of repairs, or do you really need to have that system replaced because there was something quite inherently wrong? These intangible and tangible qualifications that I just mentioned, I think one of the critical aspects is to know the commissioning process, know how it differs from an MEP commissioning process. Building enclosure, you get involved much earlier. Your design work is just as early as MEP, but your site work, your construction side, is much earlier. Obviously, you do not want to leave things until the end of the construction process to be able to try and identify what was wrong. Knowledge and experience. You saw earlier, we do a lot of hands-on work. We get up close and personal with the details. And it stems from our forensic practice. In the example here, we were asked to investigate some mold and high humidity issues inside of a building. We were able to look back at the documents and say, yes, this was a design issue. But it came from an understanding that the porosity of the CMU wall here that you see with the arrow, the air and vapor path is able to move through the CMU wall in a hot, humid climate into the interior cooled conditioned spaces, whereupon it finds materials, substrates below the dew point, condensation occurs, and subsequently mold had developed. A nasty problem for that owner now to have to remediate soon after the building was actually constructed. So that technical input is important to bring for a commissioning provider to bring to the table. Some of the intangible sides is we're looking to be a collaborative partner. Nobody wins if this is a controversial type of arrangement. So we look to establish good communication, timely communication, and there's many certifications that are offered in the industry right now. And I think we just want to be wary that it's not always, you're not always qualified, even though you may potentially have those letters after your name. So it's important to look at exactly what the experience is that your commissioning provider is bringing to the table for your project. And then lastly, we're going to look here at the roles of the different players on the commissioning team. We've talked about what the commissioning provider should be bringing to you, but then again, it's a two-way street. So the owners have a critical role here. The owner must be engaged in the process for it to succeed. If you're going to sit back and kind of let somebody else, let a CM or let these other parties kind of take the show for you, you're not going to get as a successful project as what you possibly could should you take a very active role. And an active role means defining what exactly your expectations are in the OPR and defining a budget that's appropriate for the level of risk that you're prepared to be taking on. Do you want to commission all of your building enclosure systems, or do you just want to focus on one or two if your budget is only smaller? One thing that I like to exercise here is linking testing to pay applications, so to ensure that the contractor does not just fly by doing testing and verifying performance in the field. We like to have support, the owner should support the reviews and testing, and importantly, as we said, engage a technically competent building enclosure commissioning provider. An architect's role is pretty clear. We understand that there's a design side, which is in the office, and that there's a construction side. And we, as the commissioning provider, we're going to drag the architect out into the field and work with them on the development of the details, should they be found to be questions about what to do in the field. As Elizabeth mentioned, you can't always detail everything. There are many times unforeseen conditions, and many times contractors will inadvertently create problems by which the architect needs to have an active role in considering and addressing. So be a collaborative partner, I think, as architects try to be. Consider the design and submittal review comments seriously, and include the commissioning spec in your project manual, and take advantage of the technical expertise that your commissioning provider is bringing to the project. And lastly, I do think that it is additional services, the commissioning process, and the architects should rightfully be compensated for their role in the commissioning process. The contractor should be responding to the specification, so it should actually be built into their price to be part of the commissioning process. So there really shouldn't be any kind of extra unforeseen costs there. It really does overlap somewhat with the contractor's quality control own internal process, hopefully there is one. But a contractor's role in achieving success, if we could, is that our experience has shown that sometimes subcontractors or GCs will identify exclusions in their bids that don't always become apparent until such time as a shop drawing is submitted or product data or testing is brought to the table, and at that point the contractor indicates that they have excluded. So be transparent about those types of exclusions, or owners, architects specifically look for them as items that need to get factored into the field side. Include testing and building enclosure milestones in your schedule. That way everyone's going to be aware of when that occurs, when they can be out to review it, and that testing does not get lost in the haste of building buildings and getting enclosures getting buildings to a dried-in state. Coordinate and review submittals. Do not just rubber stamp submittals and be out there actively looking at the work to verify that it is installed in accordance with the approved submittals. And Elizabeth has mentioned the benefit of mock-ups. There really is, it's such a great exercise to understand how to correctly sequence the work and really try and get things right so that you can replicate those actually on the project. Take time to walk the job site with your building enclosure commissioning provider because at that point they're going to be able to talk to you, anticipate problems, ask questions about what things are happening, and have a very interactive review of the enclosure so that you know that as a contractor what to look for and be proactive yourself in the implementation of hopefully your own QA/QC plan. So wrapping up today's webinar, in summary, there is a lot that obviously can go wrong with your building enclosure, and it is much harder to fix it once it's constructed and the building is occupied. Building enclosure commissioning helps to minimize the risk and promote durability and performance. And there are several documents that we mentioned earlier. Some of them are available for sale, while some of them are available, like the NIBS Guideline 3 is available on the whole building design guideline for a free download. Successful building enclosure commissioning, it does require a competent building enclosure commissioning provider, an engaged owner, architect, and contractor, a good mechanical commissioning provider, and collaboration and communication. And with that, we'd like to wish you all further successful building enclosure commissioning projects and a very happy new year. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Elizabeth. As a reminder, if you have a question, please type it into the Q&A box and hit submit. We'll try to get to all the questions before the end of the hour, but if we're unable to get to yours during the call, either Elizabeth or Fiona will follow up with you afterward. All right, let's go ahead and take our first question. Do you require curtain wall and roofing coordination shop drawings that bring various trades together, or does that only happen in a mock-up?
I can take that one. This is Elizabeth. So the question is, do you require coordination? So what we require, what we ask, what we recommend, I should say, is that shop drawings from the various trades provide detail-specific, project-specific details. So rather than just submitting manufacturer's standard details, you're actually going to show in your shop drawings the project-specific substrate, the anticipated interface. So like in the two shop drawings that I showed in the slide, if I could find them easily, I would pop that up for you. But what we showed here, we go. What we would ask is that the roofing trade coordinate with the shop drawing trade, and they each show what's anticipated by the other. So it's a truly coordinated process.
It should be, and all submittals should be coordinated. One of the things that's not exactly part of the commissioning process, but we found a lot of value in is doing a workshop where all the trades come together and we look at these typical conditions and verify that everything is coordinated. It's kind of a whole day exercise, but terrifically beneficial.
Yeah, the whole by others thing, that's usually one that we take a close look at when it's just by others. It's who's providing this, and let's look at how they're intending to install it.
Okay, our next question regarding construction performance testing. You mentioned that it's best that the tester be under the contractor for coordination. Could there be conflict of interest with the testing outcome? What requirements could help prevent this?
Usually there's a requirement for the building enclosure commissioning provider to also witness the testing, so it's not just the contractor observing the testing, but there's also independent test agents that can be specified, and usually they should be fairly independent in their views. It's not typically a condition where you'd have the fox watching the hen house or such, if that was the concern.
Yeah, I would also just add to that, it's important to have very clear specifications that outline the expectations for the testing. So what is the pressurization? What is the expected leakage, or not expected leakage? Are you allowing zero leakage, or are you allowing the teaspoon of water that might allow? So just being really clear with what the expectations are, so there's no questions going into it.
And that should be part of the spec review.
Yep.
All right. Our next question. There was a lot of red line on the design details shown. How receptive do you find the designers to your reviews? Do they push back and feel you're attacking their capabilities, or are they grateful for the input?
I'll take this one. This was one of the project I'm working on, and we're working with a really great architect on this project. And this goes back to really, communication style and the team buying into the process and recognizing it's not intended to attack or it's intended to be collaborative, and really we're just trying to help. So, obviously there's a way to communicate these things, and doing so in a professional way is important, but also just, an architect has a million things to think about. One, the enclosure, but also everything going on inside, where a building enclosure commissioning provider's role is to strictly look at, how is this building enclosure going to perform, and is trained to look at all of these with a really eagle eye. So you don't expect an architect to find everything and see everything. So I think there just has to be recognition that it's collaborative and communicate it in the right way.
Okay, our next question. Shouldn't sealant compatibility testing be a main focus of the building enclosure commissioning process?
It is, and it's just as important as all of the other tests. You're absolutely right. Sealant compatibility and adhesion, given so many of our systems rely upon that quality of performance, absolutely, and it is. It's included, I know, in the typical building enclosure commissioning specs that we put together, and the testing matrix that's associated with those, if it's not sufficiently covered by the 79200 tech section. Yes.
All right, the next question. Sorry if I missed it, but does the building enclosure commissioning process also review also review specifications in addition to the drawings? Does the provider ever provide detail sketches, or are they limited to written markups? Basically, I'm trying to understand if there's overlap between the provider's scope and what we typically hire an enclosure consultant to do.
There is overlap in the context, but both Elizabeth and I also do consulting, so and that's where I think what we're trying to reinforce here is that there's an opportunity for a consultant to be one and the building enclosure commissioning provider. Yes, I think if we don't take off our consulting hats just because we've put on a commissioning hat, and that's the value in having a technically competent building enclosure commissioning provider, is that they are going to wrap up those qualities or those technical components of a commissioning, of a drawing review, a specification review, thumbnail sketches, and providing, other input on the design. As the architect, you are still responsible for those designs, just like you would be if we had a consulting or a commissioning relationship. But there's value in having a commissioning provider that's not just a check-the-box type of provider here.
Okay, the next question. By workshop with all trades, how early in the process do you like to hold that? As a pre-construction meeting in the field, during the shop drawing review / development process?
The best time to do that is right ahead of the mock-up, when at least the majority of the submittals have been approved, and so that you have actual materials, actual details, and systems by which you can be, realistically putting together a workshop for interfacing conditions and such. So hopefully that answered sufficiently the question. You can pre-construction, obviously.
Okay. Can you explain more on the interaction between the owner, the provider, and the contractor with regard to on-site test failures? Is there a plan set before construction starts for failures, or is it or after a failure is found?
I can take.
Should be. Okay.
Go ahead, Fiona.
I'm just going to say, within the Building Enclosure commissioning spec, which should be issued with the project manual, there should be articles identifying, in the event of failure, what happens, who is responsible financially, what is to happen if you have one test failure. Like what we recommend is that for every one test location that fails, another 2 of the same type are tested until such time as all pass. So those implications are identified in the specification, so that in that effect, the contractor knows exactly what to expect at the start of the project. Similarly, just as Elizabeth had indicated, the test pressures, definition of failure, all of those types of things, those nuances that are contained within the standards needs to be understood by the commissioning provider, and if there's any question about interpretation, then that needs to get addressed prior to any of the testing being performed. Elizabeth, did you have anything else?
Nope, that's what I was going to explain as well.
Okay, the next question. How often is WJE actually engaged early during the design development phase?
I can speak
many
from my, yes, I was going to say the same. From my experience, many times, I think owners have found it to be a beneficial process. Hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn for anyone there, but engaging us early to catch as many of these things early, because if you get us involved too late, the backtracking can be pretty hard. It's much more difficult. It's a much smoother, better process if you're involved early, and I think that's pretty well understood.
Okay, we've got time.
There's also a requirement for lead to get us in early as well, so a lot of times that's driving our engagement.
All right, we've got time for one more question. Is it redundant to have a building enclosure consultant and a building enclosure commissioning provider on the same project? If not, why not?
It may be redundant if you're working for the same organization, but it's not unheard of to have a commissioning provider working for the owner and a consultant working for the architect. Elizabeth,
yeah,
what do you think?
I was going to say, yeah, sometimes there's some redundancies there, but both provide a lot of value, and if those two can coordinate well together, it's just even more success, I think, for your project.
Wonderful. Okay. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Fiona.
No, I'm fine. Thanks, Liz.
All right. So we are at the end of the hour, and we don't have any more time for questions during the live call today. We got a lot of really good ones. Thank you. As I said before, Elizabeth or Fiona will follow up with everybody who asked a question to make sure we are able to answer it. So to wrap things up, again, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Fiona, for the excellent presentation. And thank you all for joining us. We hope it's been educational. As a reminder, you'll receive an email with a link to an on-demand version of this webinar that you can use to rewatch the presentation at your convenience or share with any colleagues who weren't able to join us live today. And that email will also include links to access related resources, including a PDF copy of this presentation, as well as a link to download your certificate of participation. Finally, there's a teal icon at the bottom of your screen that will open a very brief survey about today's webinar, which includes an opportunity to suggest future WJE webinar topics. All feedback is welcome. It'll only take a few seconds. We'd really appreciate you guys opening up that survey briefly. And if you have any questions about today's webinar or future webinars, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, Liz Pemper at lpemper@wje.com. So again, thank you so much for your time, and we hope you have a great rest of the day.